Amidst the escalating India-Canada standoff, Justin Trudeau seems to have softened his stance. Despite alleging that India is involved in the killing of Khalistani terrorist Niger on Canadian soil, Mr. Trudeau said that Ottawa is still committed to building closer ties with India. He also said that he thinks it is extremely important that Canada and its allies continue to engage constructively and seriously with India, given its growing importance on the world stage. Meanwhile, India has also made its stance very clear. External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar said that the situation with Canada is not a deadlock and reciprocated to Canada's climb down. Let's listen in to the two.
It's extremely important that all of us continue to engage constructively and seriously with the government of India. India is a growing economic power, an important geopolitical player. And as we presented with our Indo-Pacific strategy just last year, we're very serious about building closer ties with India.
I don't know if I would use the term deadlock. I think you would have heard me speak about this matter. I think the first time in CFR in New York, today at somewhat greater length at Hudson. The issue is as follows, which is that the Canadians have made some allegations. We have pointed out to them that this is not Government of India's policy, but if they are prepared to share with us specifics and anything relevant, we are also open to looking at it.
And speaking in Washington, D.C. after attending a meeting with U.S. Secretary of State Blinken, Dr. Jaishankar also said there was a climate of violence and atmosphere of intimidation against Indian diplomats in Canada. He urged people not to normalize what is happening in Canada and also stated that New Delhi and Ottawa will have to talk to each other and see how they can resolve their differences over the death of Niger. Let's listen in to some of the key takeaways from Dr. Jaishankar's address.
I'm actually in a situation where my diplomats are unsafe going to the embassy or to the consulates.
In Canada?
In Canada. They are publicly intimidated, and that has actually compelled me to temporarily suspend even visa operations in Canada. No incident is isolated, and no incident is the totality. There is a context for everything. There are multiple problems out there. So I guess in the case of individual incidents, we'll have to, see the concerned governments will have to talk to each other and see how they, sort of take it forward. We consider to be a very permissive Canadian attitude towards terrorists, extremists, people who openly advocate violence. And they have been given operating space in Canada because of the compulsions of Canadian politics.
All right, to talk more about this, Dr. Spencer Critchley, Democrat analyst, joins us on the program. Ambassador Ashok Sajjana, former diplomat, also with us on the show. Pathikrit Pine, international affairs expert, joins us on the program as well. Last but not the least, Adit Kothari, foreign affairs expert, joining us on the broadcast as well. Dr. Spencer Critchley, I'll begin with you. I hope you can hear me. Thank you so much for joining us. Well, Dr. S. Jaishankar is obviously concerned that Indian diplomats are not safe in Canada, and the same has also been conveyed to the Americans as well. He met up with Anthony Blinken and said that there is an environment of intimidation that Canada needs to get rid of so that the diplomats in Canada can feel safe. What do you make of what's going on between India and Canada? And do you think that Canada has also failed in trying to solicit some sort of a support or comment against India from some of its allies, including the United States?
Well, first of all, before I go on, I am very flattered, but I need to correct you. I'm not a doctor. I'm just Spencer Critchley. The most important issue I see here, apart from whoever is at fault in this situation, is the preservation of what a very important philosopher who's not too well known outside of academic circles, Jürgen Habermas, had to say about the public sphere in the functioning of democracy and now really the world order amongst all of the democracies. And what that means is that we are going to have situations where we have people who have very strong national loyalties, religious loyalties, other kinds of loyalties, but we cannot live together either in a national community or an international community unless we maintain a public sphere where we have what he called communicative rationality going on, meaning we have to set aside any claims to absolute truth or righteousness that we might have, no matter how deeply and fervently we may believe them, and meet each other within a public sphere defined by rules, commonly agreed upon norms. And the reason I say that is, if we try to assign blame with, say, the Modi government in India, or with the Trudeau government in Canada, or with the Sikh community, or with the Hindu community, or any of these people, we can have that fight until the end of time, and it's very unlikely anybody's going to win it, and it's very unlikely that anybody's going to be satisfied by the result, and many innocent people will suffer in the meantime. So I'm very heartened to hear these comments from the government of India, the government of Canada, and the government of the United States, trying to calm down the passions and trying to get us back into the public sphere, where hopefully we can have a rational discussion and as needed investigations to find out what happened, and also keep our eyes on the higher values, which in this case I think have to be peaceful, friendly, and cooperative relations between India and Canada, as well as amongst Canada, the United States, India, and really all countries interested in moving forward in an atmosphere of mutual cooperation.
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely spot on. Ambassador Jaishankar, taking a leaf out of what Mr. Critchley said, it is important to understand that the end objective here is to get along with Canada, and Canada should feel the same way too. You know, they brought this upon themselves when the Prime Minister spoke against India without proof in his own parliament, and we had to reciprocate in some manner or the other, which we did. But the fallout of this diplomatic entanglement, if we can call it, has been that the citizens of Canada, of Indian origin, and even Indians living in Canada, have been suffering. Dr. Jaishankar also pointed out that there is nothing like the term deadlock when it comes to diplomacy, and I'm sure you can bear witness to that as well. You've served the country long enough, sir, to in fact endorse that statement as well. But what's next between India and Canada here? Canada perhaps has stopped soliciting help or comments from other countries, and now it's realized that they have no choice but to deal with India on their own.
Yeah, thank you very much, Vineet, for having me on your show. I think you're very right. You know, as far as we diplomats are concerned, we are basically all optimists. You know, unless you are an optimist, you cannot really find solutions to, so many of the intractable challenges and problems that confront the world. So first is, of course, being a realist, but also an optimist to see how things are to be done. Second thing is, Vineet, that this whole issue, what Canada has, and I've said it on your channel and other channel, I think Canada has brought it upon itself without any evidence over the last 10 days. It's more than 10 days, actually 12 days since the first allegation was made. The Canadian Prime Minister is still talking about only allegations. He's not talking about evidence. So obviously there is no evidence. The investigation has not been completed. There's no charge sheet been filed. No arrest been made, although it's more than 3.5 months since this killing took place. So that is number two. Number three is, when we are looking at this killing, as Dr. Jaishankar has said, this killing does not need to be looked at in isolation. There is a whole system of permissiveness, of violence, of threats, of intimidation. That is the sort of ecosystem that has been created in Canada. And I think it's in that context that this, development has to be seen. India has been taking up this issue. You know, let's not forget the Kanishka bombing in 1985. 331 citizens of Canada, most of them from Canada, they perished. All because Canada would not take the right decisions at the right time. And, you know, there have been sort of so much of organized crime in Canada. And for the Canadian Prime Minister to make one single killing of a separatist who has been designated as a terrorist in India, against whom there has been a red corner Interpol notice that has been issued. For that, you know, to say that it is the violation of rule of law or whatever, I think this really befuddles the imagination. The last point I'd like to make, Vineet, is that there have been umpteen number of extradition requests that have been made by India of so many people who are engaged in violence, in fact, in provoking and instigating violence in India. And there have been dossiers that have been provided, there has been evidence. Mr. Trudeau speaks about allegations, but on the other hand, India has provided solid evidence to Canada on the basis of which these extraditions should take place. So I don't think, you know, Mr. Trudeau is trying to sort of, you know, give this suggestion as if it is just one killing. You know, there are so many killings that keep on taking place in Canada. We had this Ripudaman Malik who was shot just a few months ago. Even after Nijar's killing, just 5-6 days ago, there was another separatist terrorist who was killed, some Sukha by name. There are so many of them. There was Karima Baloch, you know, and there was the finger was pointing towards Pakistan and towards
the ISI.
Nothing was done about that. So the point, the last point I'm making is that if it really, you know, this whole issue helps in waking up Canada, that it's this environment of permissiveness in Canada is hurting itself, you know, much more, because it is impacting on the law and order situation in that country, which is affecting its own people. The Indians who are there, they are suffering. The Canadians who are there who want to come to India, they are suffering because my ambassador, my consuls general, they cannot go to the embassies, to the High Commission or to the CGs, and they cannot issue visas. So I think everyone is suffering basically because of this very permissive and lax environment that Canada has provided. But going forward, of course, I think diplomats are always happy to engage, are willing to engage, and that's exactly what Dr. Jaishankar has said. Provide some specific relevant information, we'll look at it and we'll talk. Really.
Right, absolutely right. So Pathikrit, you know, do you think much has been made in Canada and by the Liberal government led by Justin Trudeau when it comes to the freedom of speech, the permissiveness which is being allowed, the liberty which is being given to these anti-social elements, and the help that they're getting from you know, outfits such as the ISI and the Chinese government is not even being monitored, is not even being considered a cause for the Canadian government? Do you think that it is a cesspool of self-destruction if something like this continues in Canada? Let's not forget what Hillary Clinton said about Pakistan, that, you know, if you're going to have snakes in your backyard, don't think or don't assume that they're not going to bite you one day.
Vineet, good evening, and good evening to all the fellow respected panelists. First of all, let me start with a small comment. With due respect, Mr. Spencer said that blaming, he quoted about blaming the Sikh community. Let me tell you, the Khalistan issue and the Sikh community are not synonymous. The Sikh community in India is tremendously highly respected. They have very high representation in the Indian Armed Forces and other wings of the government. Khalistan issue should not be equated with the Sikh community. No one in this country is blaming the Sikh community. The Sikh community is one of the most respected community, highly patriotic community. So there's no question of pointing fingers at all towards them. Now let me tell you what is happening. I think some good advice has been given by the fellow global north countries to Canada. That is what you have to try to punch more than your weight. But just because Trudeau is making a few conciliatory statements doesn't mean that India is going to leave. Simply because it is not about what Justin Trudeau is saying, it is about what he would do in terms of the situation in Canada, which is there for the last 30, 40 years. Okay, so I think there's a message India is sending towards the whole of global north. What is that message? That on one hand, you talk about liberalism, rule-based order, sovereignty, territorial integrity, and then in the name of liberalism, you are allowing all kinds of secessionist elements having connection and nexus with violent extremist organizations, narcotic cartel, to do everything in the name of freedom of speech in your own countries. We know what is happening in Canada, and at the same time, in case of United Kingdom, you see there are so many instances of people who have laundered money, who have been involved in crimes. They have gone to United Kingdom, they have sought political asylum, and they have got it. And it takes them years, often decades, for countries like India to actually extradite them. And so this is where I think it is time for the global north to introspect that what is happening actually. Let me also tell you, Vineet, I'm repeating, I said it in the last program yesterday, that unfortunately when it comes to the Kanishka bombing and the incidents of 9/11, the global north does not see the two things in the same way. And that is where I think there's a difference in terms of yardstick as to how you look at terrorism. I have seen many commentators saying that Kanishka was tragic, but they don't call it terrorism. That is where the problem is. They say Khalistani is a rebel rouser. Now, they're not calling it as something which is as heinous as other organizations are. I do not think ever Justin Trudeau would have allowed any organization with affiliation to Al-Qaeda to do in Canada in the name of freedom of speech what they're allowing to do the other organizations, simply because they are inimical to India or the developing world and not to global north. This is where I think this distinction that the West has, has to go. And, it is not just about India. Today, the Bangladesh government, the Sri Lankan government are coming up and saying what the Canadians are doing. And the Canadians would not have done it had the yardstick of looking at terrorism would have been the same for all. And if United Nations had a definition of terrorism on which Prime Minister Modi has stayed for a long time. And this is where the problem starts. Let me also say, and these are not my words, there is a very, very noted article that has come out recently by Shishir Gupta in Hindustan Times. In Hindustan Times, Shishir Gupta writes a few days back that the intelligence chief of India, he did not name, but I'm sure we can make it out. The intelligence chief of India told the CIA director, as per the article, that the only reason that India has not taken any action against Gurupatwant Singh Pannu, who is a dual citizen of United States and Canada, is because India believes that he is working on behalf of CIA. So on one hand, you have what is happening in Canada. On the other hand, you have, GS Pannu based in United States. And when you know what is happening in United Kingdom, let me ask, what then is wrong, the difference between Pakistan and the global north developed countries who talk about liberal democracy? And this is where I think we need to look at it this way, that today's India is not what it was 30 years back. Imagine today India is raising the voice. I just wonder, Vineet, how many other countries have endured such things, gone through, literally collapsed, had internal violence and still couldn't say anything because there was nobody to talk about or hear about the concerns of global south. So I think, with all due respect, I think the global north today, nobody is talking about blaming anybody. I think the global north, especially countries like Canada, need to be a little more rational. Of course, nobody's talking about, having total face-off and cutting off diplomatic ties. But if all have to grow together, then we have to understand each other's concerns. That is it, nothing more. But I think it's time.
You're right. You put the entire problem in perspective. You put the entire problem in perspective. But the fact of the matter is, Adit, there have been lapses on behalf of the Canadian government. So many threats, so many insults, parading and taking out a procession in which the assassination of one of our former prime ministers was displayed at large for the Khalistani community to laugh and mock is inexcusable. Do you think that the Canadian government, despite its concessions and its praises for India as a coming or a growing economy and a powerful player geopolitically, has to do much more for relationships to turn green again, to be normal again?
No, absolutely. I mean, to begin with, they need to kick this political correctness and hypocrisy into the dustbin. You can't have, in this day and age, you can't have your definitions of good terrorists and bad terrorists any longer. That era is long gone. Like Patikrit also outlined, there has to be parity in the definition of who and what is a terrorist at the end of the day, which the West is not sort of lining up to for some odd reason. I mean, for example, we need to assess what the ripple effects of Trudeau's very irresponsible statement in the parliament has caused. It's just not Canada which is suffering from misinformation and dangerous fake narratives that certain elements are now, using and exploiting to create chaos and vandalism. We've recently just seen what's happened in the UK, what's transpired against an Indian diplomat, where the UK security apparatus has completely failed the fundamentals of Geneva conventions, where you're supposed, protection of a diplomat, of an international foreign diplomat, is the cornerstone of any international relations, and that is what Western nations are continuously failing, whether it be United Kingdom or even Canada. You just mentioned the eulogizing of Indira Gandhi's murder being paraded through the streets of Surrey. This is something which must be dismantled. It must be mitigated, and that can only happen, in my opinion, if India persevere with their Western allies, including Canada, to produce those credible forensic evidences that they have been talking about, which they allegedly exist, and which I don't per se see any chances of being existing, because that is just not India's modus operandi. We've never acted like that for the past 75 years of our existence. I don't see any reason why we would act in a certain way at this juncture, especially when India is trying to create an image of a global binder in the global domain. Whereas on the hindsight, if you look at Canada, who is Canada essentially providing safe havens to? From Lakhbir Singh Landa to Goldie Brar to Arshdeep Dalla, all of them who have red corner notices against them. There are dossiers which the Indian government, and very thorough dossiers which the Indian government has provided to Canada. They have established links with the ISI, and those are the kind of nefarious actors which Canada is essentially going ahead and providing salary.
In fact, Adit, Niger went to Pakistan in 2012 and got arms and ammunition training from the ISI, and then went back to Canada. And this is something which is on public record. We've run out of time. Mr. Critchley, I'll take a last question from you. Do you think that when it comes to cooperation and, putting things back into order as they were before, this tension started, Canada, more than India, has to do more?
No, I'm reluctant to frame it that way. And I want to emphasize once again that the pursuit of justice is understandable, and the belief that there is an answer to be found in the righteousness of one nation versus another, or one religion versus another, or any group identity versus another, is what perpetuates violence and suffering throughout human history. This is a lesson we are learning at bitter cost in the United States, where many Americans seem to want to squander the precious gift of liberal democracy and retreat into these nationalist passions and determine that, well, our side is righteous, the other side is evil. And I'm heartened to hear within this discussion the calls to produce evidence, to investigate evidence, to conduct diplomacy. But I just hope everybody will not think that at the end of that road is some kind of ultimate absolution for my side and condemnation for the other side. We are all deeply flawed as human beings. We've all done bad things. Every nation has done bad things. Every single nation has done bad things, because that urge is in human nature. So I hope we will continue to do our best as people, no matter what our leaders are saying, to preserve that public sphere.
You're quite right, sir. And I in more ways than one concur with what you have to say, that there are virtues and vices with every nation, and that's exactly what we have to keep in mind. And that's perhaps what's called maturity, with which both these countries have to press forth for greater ties. Would like to thank all my guests for being a part of this conversation. We're going to dip into a short break. Be right back.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.